You've done the work, you've meditated, you've journaled, you understand manifestation, shadow work, energetic alignment. You can speak fluently about consciousness, presence, healing frequencies. You've read the books, attended the retreats, collected the practices like tools in a kit you carry everywhere. And still, underneath all of it, there's a heaviness you can't name. A sense that no matter how awakened you become, no matter how many layers you peel back, there's something at the core that remains untouched, unreached, unhealed. You look around at others on the spiritual path and you notice something. The ones who speak most beautifully about love often struggle to receive it. The ones who teach presence are often running from their past. The ones who radiate light are often the ones who spent the most time in darkness. And maybe, in a quiet moment you don't admit to anyone, you've wondered, why are the most spiritually awake people often the most deeply wounded? If that question has ever crossed your mind, what I'm about to share might reframe everything you thought you knew about spirituality, healing, and why you were drawn to this path in the first place. Because according to Dr. Gabor Maté, the spiritual journey isn't always about transcendence. Sometimes it's about survival. There's a kind of person who's drawn to spirituality in a way that goes beyond curiosity. It's not casual, it's not recreational, it's urgent. They don't dabble in meditation, for they need it. They don't explore consciousness, they chase it. They don't read spiritual texts for inspiration. They read them looking for answers to questions they can't articulate. Questions like, why do I feel so separate from everyone? Why does nothing in the material world satisfy me? Why do I feel like I'm searching for something I can't name? And if you're one of these people, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know what it's like to feel more at home in spiritual concepts than in your own body. More comfortable talking about the universe than about your childhood. More fluent in the language of awakening than in the language of your own emotions. You've probably been told you're an old soul, that you're here for a purpose, that your sensitivity is the gift. And maybe that's true. But according to Gabor Maté, there's something else at play. Something most spiritual communities won't talk about. The people most drawn to spirituality are often the people most disconnected from themselves. And that disconnection didn't start with a spiritual awakening. It started with a wound. Here's the part that's hard to hear. For many people, spirituality isn't just a path to enlightenment. It's a refuge from pain. It's a way to bypass the unbearable reality of what happened to them by focusing on what's happening in higher dimensions, past lives, cosmic meaning. It's a way to make sense of suffering by reframing it as chosen, destined, spiritually significant. And there's nothing wrong with finding meaning in pain. That's part of being human. But when spirituality becomes a way to avoid feeling the pain, when it becomes another form of dissociation, it stops being healing and starts being a very sophisticated kind of hiding. Gabor Maté often speaks about this in his work on trauma and addiction. He points out that people who experienced early emotional neglect, abandonment, or lack of attunement often grow up feeling fundamentally disconnected, not from the universe, from themselves. They learn very young that their inner world is not safe, that the emotions are too much, not enough, or unwelcome. So they leave, not physically, but energetically, psychologically. They dissociate. They float above their pain. They learn to live in their heads, in their imagination, in abstract concepts, anywhere but in their body, in their feelings, in the present moment. And years later, when they discover spirituality, it feels like coming home. Because finally there's a framework that validates what they've been doing all along, leaving the material world, transcending the body, seeking something beyond the pain of human existence. But here's what they don't realize. They're not transcending, they're escaping. And the very thing that makes them so good at spirituality, their ability to detach, to rise above, to see beyond the physical, is the same thing that's kept them from healing. Let's be specific about what this looks like. You meet someone who can talk for hours about unity consciousness, about how we're all one, about unconditional love, but they can't have a difficult conversation with their partner without shutting down. They'll tell you that anger is a low vibration, that forgiveness is the highest path, that holding boundaries is just ego. But what they're really saying is, I was never allowed to be angry, so I've spiritualized my inability to feel it. You meet someone who's deeply invested in healing the collective, in raising the vibration of the planet, in being of service, but they can't rest, they can't receive, they can't let anyone take care of them because their worth is still tied to usefulness, and spirituality has given them a new way to earn love by being the healer, the teacher, the light worker. You meet someone who talks about surrender, about letting go, about trusting the universe, but they're using spiritual language to avoid taking responsibility for their life. They don't set goals because everything happens for a reason. They don't leave harmful situations because this is my lesson. They don't advocate for themselves because it's all divinely orchestrated. And underneath all of it is the same wound, a deep early belief that they have no power, no agency, no right to want something different. Here's where Gabor Mate's work becomes essential because he doesn't pathologize spirituality, he contextualizes it. He asks, what was the environment that made this person need to leave their body? What happened that made the material world feel so unsafe that the only option was to seek refuge in the immaterial? And when you ask that question, patterns emerge. The child who grew up in chaos often becomes the adult obsessed with finding inner peace because they never had outer peace. The child who was emotionally neglected often becomes the adult seeking cosmic connection because they never had human connection. The child who was told their feelings were wrong often becomes the adult trying to transcend all feeling because feeling was never safe. The child who had to be the caretaker, the good one, the one who held everything together, they become the adult who believes their purpose is to heal others because their own pain was never allowed to matter. None of this is conscious. None of this is a choice. It's adaptation. The same adaptation that helped them survive childhood is now showing up as spiritual seeking. And the tragedy is they think they're healing. They think they're evolving. But often they're just reenacting the same pattern in a different language. So what does real healing look like? This is the part where it gets uncomfortable. Because real healing doesn't start in the cosmos, it starts in a body. It doesn't start with transcendence, it starts with presence. It doesn't start with understanding your soul contract. It starts with understanding what happened to you in this life, in this body, in the relationships that shaped you. And for many spiritually oriented people, that feels like a step backward. They've spent years learning to rise above their pain, to reframe it, to see it from a higher perspective. And now you're telling them they need to go back down into it, to feel it, to sit with the parts of themselves they've been avoiding through all this spiritual work? Yes, because you can't heal what you won't feel. You can understand it intellectually. You can reframe it spiritually. You can meditate on it, pray about it, create rituals around it. But if you're not actually feeling it in your body, in real time, without the buffer of spiritual concepts, you're not healing it. You're managing it. And there's a difference. Gabor Maté talks about this in terms of authenticity versus spiritual bypassing. Authenticity means being present with what is, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it doesn't fit your spiritual beliefs about what should be. It means feeling your anger, even if your spiritual community says anger is a low vibration. It means setting boundaries, even if your teacher said boundaries are just ego. It means admitting you're lonely, you're struggling, you're scared, even when your Instagram feed is full of posts about gratitude and abundance. Spiritual bypassing is using spiritual concepts to avoid dealing with unresolved psychological wounds. It's saying everything happens for a reason, when what you really need to say is, what happened to me was wrong, and I'm angry about it. It's saying, I'm releasing this to the universe, when what you really need to do is have a hard conversation with someone who hurt you. It's saying, I forgive them, when you haven't even let yourself feel how much they harmed you. And here's the thing. Spiritual communities often reward bypassing. They praise the person who forgives quickly, who doesn't hold grudges, who stays positive, who rises above. But they don't ask, what are you actually avoiding by rising above so fast? What would happen if you stayed with the feeling a little longer? Because real forgiveness, real peace, real transcendence, it doesn't come from skipping steps. It comes from going through them slowly, messily, honestly. And this is where the wound and the awakening meet. Because the same sensitivity that made you vulnerable to being wounded is the same sensitivity that makes you capable of profound awakening. The same ability to feel deeply, to perceive beyond the surface, to sense what others miss. That's both your wound and your gift. The problem is when you only develop the gift and never heal the wound. When you become so good at accessing higher states of consciousness that you use them to avoid the lower states, the grief, the rage, the loneliness, the shame. When you become so identified with being spiritual that you can't admit when you're struggling, because struggling doesn't fit the image of someone who's awakened. And that's when spirituality becomes another prison, not one made of dogma or rules, but one made of your own need to transcend pain instead of transform it. So, how do you know if your spirituality is healing or hiding? Ask yourself these questions. Can you feel your anger without labeling it as low vibration? Can you set a boundary without justifying it with spiritual reasons? Can you admit you're in pain without immediately looking for the lesson? Can you be in your body, really in your body? Or do you constantly feel like you're floating above it, observing it, trying to transcend it? Can you be present with someone else's pain without trying to fix it, reframe it, or offer them a spiritual perspective? Can you rest without feeling guilty? Can you receive without needing to give back? Can you exist without a purpose, without being of service, without being on a mission? If the answer to any of these is no, you're not broken. But you might be using spirituality the way someone else uses work or substances or relationships as a way to avoid being with yourself. And the invitation isn't to stop being spiritual, it's to start being honest. Here's what integration actually looks like. It's the meditation teacher who can sit in silence with themselves and also go to therapy to work on their attachment patterns. It's the energy healer who understands chakras and also understands that their need to heal others comes from never being allowed to need healing themselves. It's the person who believes in synchronicity and also takes responsibility for their choices. It's the light worker who honors their sensitivity and also learns that having boundaries doesn't make them less spiritual, it makes them healthier. Integration is when your spirituality enhances your humanity instead of replacing it. When you can hold both the cosmic and the personal, the transcendent and the embodied, the awakened part and the wounded part, and you stop seeing those as contradictions, because they're not. You are not either spiritual or wounded, you are both. And the most profound healing happens when you stop trying to transcend the wound and start bringing your spirituality down into it. Gabor Maté would say, the wound is not your fault, but the healing is your responsibility. And that responsibility includes being honest about what your spiritual practice is actually doing. Is it helping you become more present, more embodied, more capable of authentic connection? Or is it helping you stay numb, stay separate, stay safe from the very feelings you need to feel in order to heal? Only you can answer that. But here's how you know you're on the right path. Real healing makes you more human, not less. It makes you more capable of sitting with discomfort, not more skilled at avoiding it. It makes you more honest about your struggles, not better at performing enlightenment. It brings you into your body, into your relationships, into the present moment, not further away from them. And it asks you to stop performing awakening and start living it, which means being messy, being imperfect, being in process, which means admitting that you're wounded and you're working on it instead of pretending you've transcended it, which means letting people see you not as a spiritual being having a human experience, but as a human being having a very real, very difficult, very sacred experience of trying to come home to yourself. And here's the beautiful part. When you stop using spirituality to escape your wound and start using it to illuminate your wound, everything changes. The spiritual tools you've learned, the meditation, the breath work, the mindfulness, the practices, they become incredibly powerful. Not because they take you out of your pain, but because they help you stay with it. Not because they help you rise above your humanity, but because they help you inhabit it more fully. You start to see that the point was never to transcend your emotions, it was to feel them without being destroyed by them. The point was never to escape your body, it was to finally feel safe enough to live in it. The point was never to become someone else, it was to stop abandoning who you actually are. And that's when spirituality stops being a refuge and starts being a resource. That's when your sensitivity stops being a wound and starts being a gift. That's when you stop performing enlightenment and start embodying it. Because here's the truth, the most spiritually awake people are often the most deeply wounded. Not because there's something wrong with them, but because their wound was so profound that they had to go searching for something bigger than themselves just to survive it. They had to find meaning, connection, a sense that they belonged somewhere, even if it wasn't here. And that searching led them to profound truths, to deep practices, to real awakening. But awakening without healing is incomplete. It's like building a beautiful house on a foundation that's cracked. Eventually, you have to go back down into the basement. You have to look at the damage. You have to do the repair work that no one sees. And that work isn't glamorous. It doesn't look like enlightenment. It looks like therapy, like crying, like finally admitting how much you were hurt, like setting boundaries with people you've been spiritually bypassing for years. It looks like being angry at your parents, even though you've quote unquote already forgiven them. It looks like asking for help, even though you're supposed to be the healer. It looks like being honest about how lonely you are, even though you preach about oneness. That's the work, not the spiritual concepts, not the higher consciousness, not the cosmic understanding. The work is coming back down into your body, into your story, into the very human experience you've been trying to transcend. And when you do that, when you stop escaping and start integrating, your spirituality becomes real. Not performative, not bypassing, not hiding, real. And that's when you stop being spiritually awake and start being whole. So here's my question for you. What are you using your spirituality to avoid feeling? What wound are you trying to transcend instead of heal? You don't have to have the answer, but asking the question is the beginning. Drop your thoughts in the comments, not because you need to confess anything, but because naming it, even once, is an act of integration. And if this landed for you, if it gave you a new way to see your spiritual journey, consider subscribing, because there's a lot more where this came from. The work of integrating the spiritual and the human, the awakened and the wounded, the cosmic and the personal, that's not a destination, it's a practice, a daily choice to stop performing and start being, and you're worth that honesty. You've been searching for the truth your whole life. Maybe it's time to stop looking in the stars and start looking in the mirror. Not because you're broken, but because you're ready. Ready to stop transcending and start healing. Ready to stop performing awakening and start living it. Ready to be both wounded and awake and to finally understand that those two things were never opposites. They were always the same path. And you've been walking it all along.